The palace was alive with drums that day, though to her it sounded more like thunder rolling through her small chest. At only 8 years old, her feet barely touched the ground as she sat on the throne they had prepared for her, draped in silks heavier than her tiny shoulders could carry. The fabric itched, the golden threads cut into her skin, but no one noticed. No one ever asked her if she was comfortable. Comfort did not matter when empires were at stake. She tried not to cry as women she barely knew painted her cheeks and pinned her hair with ornaments that tugged at her scalp. The words of her nursemaid echoed in her ears, "Smile, little one. A bride must always smile." So she did. But her smile was small, trembling, the kind a child forces when she wants to prove she is brave. The boy beside her was no older, perhaps even younger. They called him Emperor, though his crown looked too big and slipped down over his brow. His face was pale and nervous, his eyes darting around the vast chamber, looking for someone, anyone, who might rescue him from this charade. Their gazes met once, and in that brief exchange, there was no power, no ceremony, only two frightened children, each searching for comfort the other could not give. The hall was vast, filled with nobles in robes that swept the marble floors, their jewels catching the torchlight. The air smelled of incense and rose petals, but to her, it was suffocating. Whispers surrounded her, words she could barely understand. "The Empress is so young. How fragile she looks. Will she bring him luck or doom?" Their voices floated like smoke, wrapping around her tiny frame until she felt smaller than ever. The priest's voice boomed, words of union and eternity rolling over her head like waves she could not stand against. She repeated the vows they taught her, though she did not understand them. She said, yes, because they told her to, because to say otherwise was unthinkable. The crowd erupted in cheers, calling her Empress, bowing low, though she was still a child clutching the hem of her gown as if it might shield her from the world. That night, they took her to the Emperor's chamber. It was a room larger than her entire family's house, its walls carved with dragons and clouds, lanterns casting golden light. She stood there, trembling, unsure of what she was supposed to do. The boy emperor sat on the bed, swinging his legs, his crown discarded on the floor. He looked at her shyly and whispered, "Do you want to play a game?" Her breath caught. For the first time all day, someone spoke to her not as a symbol, not as a bride, but as a child. She nodded eagerly, and he pulled out carved wooden animals from a box hidden beneath the bed. They played quietly, laughing in whispers, until the footsteps of the servants reminded them that they were not allowed to be children anymore. The next morning, no one believed them when they said they had simply played. No one cared to believe. The days blurred into one another. They sat on golden thrones, side by side, nodding when ministers bowed, listening to voices that meant nothing to their ears. She tried to copy the way older women folded their hands and held their chins high, but she felt the weight of the crown pressing her down. The emperor, her husband, doodled on scraps of parchment with charcoal until the ministers scolded him. She bit her lip to hide her smile, knowing she would be punished if she laughed. In the gardens, away from prying eyes, they were freer. He would chase butterflies, and she would pick flowers, weaving crowns of daisies and pretending they were rulers of a different world, one where no one watched, no one commanded. Sometimes, They sat beneath the old oak tree, its branches spreading like a sheltering roof. There, he told her secrets. That he hated the crown. That he missed his mother. That he wished they could run away. She told him she wished the same. But dreams could not pierce the iron walls of the palace. At night, she lay awake, staring at the painted ceiling above her bed, whispering to the stars through the lattice windows. One day, I will be free. She imagined herself running through fields, barefoot, her laughter echoing in the air. She imagined herself choosing her own life, her own path. But morning always came, and with it, duty. The emperor grew frail as the months passed. He coughed often, a dry, painful sound that echoed through the corridors. The ministers whispered behind fans and scrolls, pretending not to notice, but everyone knew. She brought him warm broth and tried to make him laugh with silly faces, and for a while, it worked. But his body was too weak, his shoulders too thin to carry the weight of the world. He would grip her hand tightly as if afraid he might vanish, and she would grip back even tighter, though she could not hold him here forever. The court was merciless. While he struggled to breathe, they plotted. They watched her with hawk-like eyes, calculating what would be done with the empress child if the boy emperor did not live. She overheard them one night, their voices low but sharp. She must be remarried. The alliance must remain. The girl is valuable. Their words struck her harder than any blow. To them, she was not a child. She was not even a person. She was a piece on the chessboard of power, moved by hands that cared nothing for her tears. When he died, the world grew silent. She sat beside his bed, his hand still in hers, now cold, the little boy who had once asked her to play gone forever. Her tears stained his sheets, but no one comforted her. Servants came quickly, removing the body, dressing it in imperial robes, carrying it away to rest in golden tombs. She was pushed aside, though she had been his wife, his companion in fear and play. She cried until her eyes burned, but still, the court marched on. The very next day, whispers filled the air again. Ministers argued about her future. Some said she should be sent back to her family. Others said she must marry again to keep the alliances intact. She stood there, silent, unseen, though the discussion was about her life. Finally, the decision was made. She would be wed again, to a man older than her father, older even than her grandfather might have been. She wanted to scream, to shout, to tell them she was only 12, that she still had dolls hidden under her bed, that she still feared the dark. But the words died in her throat. That night, she crept to the oak tree in the garden, where she and the boy emperor had once played. She pressed her forehead against the rough bark and whispered, "They took him from me. Now they will take me, too." The stars above shimmered coldly, offering no answers. Her tears fell into the grass, and she promised herself one thing: if she could not be free, she would never forget. Never forget the boy who had been her only friend in the palace. Never forget the vows forced upon her lips. Never forget the fire that burned quietly, hidden beneath her sorrow. She was a child, but already she knew, her life was not her own. Not yet. But perhaps, one day, she would find a way to claim it back. The day they told her of her fate, she did not cry. She had already learned that tears meant nothing in the palace. Tears were weakness, and weakness was something the ministers and nobles drank like wine. It fueled their pride, their power. So when the decree came, that she, 12 years old, widow of the boy emperor, would now be wed to the 60-year-old duke, she stood still, her face a mask. Inside, however, she felt as though her chest were splitting in two. The duke was a man she had only seen from afar. A figure draped in heavy velvet robes, his beard white and flowing, his eyes hard and sharp as flint. He was respected, feared, spoken of in tones both reverent and cautious. Soldiers bent at the waist when he passed, even ministers chose their words carefully around him. But to her, he was simply terrifying. Not because of his titles or his power, but because he was old enough to be her grandfather, and the thought of calling him husband made her stomach twist until she thought she might be sick. On the day of the wedding, the palace glittered again, as though tragedy had not struck only weeks before. Servants lined the halls, incense burned until the air was thick and heavy, and musicians played songs that were meant to sound joyful but to her were nothing more than chains set to rhythm. Her maids dressed her in layers of red silk, each one heavier than the last, pinning her hair with ornaments so weighty she could barely hold her head straight. When they painted her lips, she tasted salt. She had bitten them raw, holding back the storm that raged inside her. "Smile," one of the attendants whispered, tilting her chin upward. A bride must smile. She remembered hearing those words years before, when she was married to the boy emperor. Back then, she had been too young to understand the cruelty of it. Now she did. Now she understood that the world did not care if she was happy, only that she played her part. The duke arrived in robes of black trimmed with gold. His steps were slow but certain, his hand clutching a cane carved with the crest of his house. He walked to her as though he were claiming a prize, not a wife. When his eyes met hers, she felt cold seep into her bones. There was no kindness there, no gentleness, only possession. The vows were spoken again, just as they had been years before. This time, she did not stumble. She repeated every word, her voice steady, though inside she screamed. The crowd cheered again, as they had before, the nobles bowing and the common people throwing petals in the air. To them, it was a union of strength, a bond between power and youth. To her, it was the end of childhood. The wedding feast stretched late into the night. Platters of roasted meat, golden fruits, and wine flowed endlessly. Musicians played, dancers twirled, and laughter echoed through the grand halls. She sat beside her new husband, silent, her hands folded tightly in her lap. He did not speak much, only looked at her now and then, his gaze like a weight pressing her further into her chair. When he did address her, it was with questions that were not really questions. "You will honor my name. You will serve my house. You will obey." She nodded, because what else could she do? When the feast ended, she was led to his chambers. The halls seemed darker that night, the flicker of torches casting shadows that seemed to reach for her. The chamber itself was vast, hung with tapestries of battles long past, the scent of old wood and smoke thick in the air. He dismissed the servants and turned toward her. She trembled, her fingers twisting in the folds of her gown. She was 12, standing before a man whose face bore the lines of 60 years. He said little. His voice was rough, commanding, when he told her to sit. She obeyed. He poured himself wine, his hand shaking slightly, and drank as though the silence between them did not matter. She sat there, her heart pounding so loudly she thought he must hear it. At last, he told her to rest. To her surprise, he did not touch her that night. Instead, he watched her as she curled beneath the heavy covers, his eyes unreadable in the dim light. She lay stiff, her back turned, waiting. For footsteps, for hands, for anything, but nothing came. Still, she did not sleep. Fear does not sleep. The days that followed were not kinder. She was given duties, taught by older women how to walk, speak, and bow in ways befitting the Duke's wife. She learned to hold her tongue at banquets, to pour wine without spilling, to listen to conversations filled with politics she could not understand. The Duke did not treat her cruelly, but neither did he treat her kindly. She was a jewel to be displayed, a symbol of alliance, a piece of property bound to his name. He expected her to be quiet, to obey, to stand at his side when he entered the court. And she did. But every step, every bow, every word unspoken chipped away at the child she still was inside. At night, she sat alone in her chambers, her dolls hidden in a chest, untouched. Sometimes she took them out, just to hold them, just to remember that she was still young, still a girl who wanted to play and laugh and run. But the walls were thick, and the palace was full of ears. She dared not be seen clinging to childhood. So she placed the dolls back in the chest and locked them away, as she locked away her tears. Her husband grew more demanding as the months passed. He brought her to meetings with nobles, where she was expected to sit silently while men twice her age discussed matters of land, armies, and gold. They never asked her opinion, never acknowledged her presence beyond the fact that she was there to confirm the Duke's status. Sometimes, he would grip her hand too tightly in public, his fingers digging into her skin, a silent reminder that she belonged to him. She never pulled away. She could not. The people cheered for her when she appeared in processions. They saw her as a symbol of fortune, of continuity, of the empire's strength. They shouted her name, praised her beauty, tossed flowers at her feet. None of them saw the hollow look in her eyes, the way her smile never reached them. None of them saw that beneath the silks and jewels was a child who still feared the dark. One evening, after a long banquet, she sat at the balcony of her chambers, staring at the moon. The gardens stretched below her, shadows shifting among the trees. She remembered the oak tree where she and the boy emperor had once played, where he had whispered dreams of freedom. She remembered his laughter, his small hands clutching the wooden animals they hid from the servants. Her chest ached with the memory. He had been the only one who saw her as a child, the only one who understood her fear. Now he was gone, and she was left alone, trapped again. She whispered into the night, her voice trembling. "Please, I am only a child." Her words dissolved into the air, unheard, unanswered. The moon shone cold and distant, offering no comfort. Still, something stirred in her as she gazed at the night sky. Perhaps it was the memory of the boy who had once told her he wished they could run away. Perhaps it was the knowledge that no one else would fight for her. Or perhaps it was simply survival. But as she sat there, her small fists clenched in her lap, she made a silent promise. If she could not escape, then she would endure. She would learn. She would watch the Duke, the ministers, the nobles. She would understand their games, their secrets, their weaknesses. They saw her as powerless. They saw her as a child who could be controlled, molded, owned. But she knew something they did not: children grow. And one day, the girl they thought they had caged might rise with a fire they could not put out. For now, she was silent. For now, she obeyed. But inside her, beneath the silks and jewels, beneath the forced smiles and bowed head, the spark of defiance burned quietly, waiting for the moment it would be needed. That night, as the Duke's footsteps echoed in the hall beyond her chamber door, she turned her gaze back to the stars and whispered again, "Not